Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today for Around the Valuation World International. My name is Chinna Chun and I'm with NACB and Consultants Training Institute. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, to obtain CP credit, you must answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during the webinar. If you have an ABW International subscription, the CP certificate will be available in your NACB account within 7 to 10 business days. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A submission form in Zoom to submit those questions to the presenter. If you have any technical questions or questions about NACBA, please direct those to me through chat, and I'll be happy to assist you. These are our technical editors for Around the Valuation World International. We have Wolfgang Mies, Andrew Newman, Pratik Shah, and also Brian Jones. Today, just have a quick GACBA news bulletin, and then we'll turn the time over. Our guest today would be Stephen White, who will be covering private company and M&A valuation financial reporting. Right, and just a quick GACB news. We do have our NACBA conference coming up in December. It'll be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on December 14th through the 15th. You can join us in person in Florida, or you can also join us virtually. To register by October 31st, you'll save $150. Some of the international chapters may have some discounts too, so reach out to us and we'll let you know if you're eligible for a different discount. And you can also view the conference agenda by clicking on that link in your materials below. All right, and with that, I'm going to we switch over to our presentation for today. It's Private Company M&A Valuation Financial Reporting with Stephen White. Stephen, excuse me, throat, sorry. Stephen White brings over 30 years of financial experience to the firm that he has started 7 years ago, Onyx Partners Group. As managing partner at Onyx Partners Group, Stephen is active in business valuation in a variety of areas and has a broad industry experience in wealth management, private banking, and investment banking. Stephen has worked with hundreds of client companies during his 30-plus years in the investment arena. Stephen publishes research related to practice management in several industries, a regular contributor to the Onyx Partners Group, Valuation Pulse, and the host of the newly launched podcast, Business Valuation Real Talk. Stephen provides valuation in 4 specific pillars: corporate valuation, gift and estates, family limited partnerships, bankruptcy, and ESOPs. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Stephen, who will get us started today.
And Chunde, thank you very much for the introduction. If you like, I can control the slides. I have it pulled up, so if you want to, yes.
Okay, I will stop sharing now, and then I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. And let me know once that screen appears there for everyone.
Yep, I can see it right now.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Chunde so eloquently mentioned, my name is Stephen White. I'm the founder and managing partner of Onyx Partners Group. We are an independent valuation firm located here in New Jersey, here in the States. And I'm excited about being here today because we get a chance to talk about certain things that are really interesting for me and the things that we cover here at Onyx Partners Group. Our main focus runs in 3 different areas. We cover ESOPs, we do a lot of work in family limited partnerships, but also in corporate valuations. And that's pretty much the bulk of where we spend a lot of our time is on the corporate valuation side. And I will say this topic in itself, from a financial reporting standpoint, and if we all look back over the last several years, I think with the expansion of fair value accounting, I think that valuation has become more of a topic of discussion. It's become it's not necessarily under scrutiny, but it's been viewed upon as one of those areas, specifically in the M&A area, that there should be a lot more guidance around this. And so today, what I wanted to do is just kind of give you a 30,000-foot view of the session that we're going to be covering today. But I think it's also important to understand is that our work as valuators really covers a couple of different areas here. And I want to share with you a slide that I truly love going over, because we get an opportunity sometimes and where we forget as valuators that there could be 2 sides to doing our work, specifically from a corporate valuation portion of it. Now, the pre-deal That's where all the excitement and the sizzle comes from. And that's one of the areas that I truly love being a part of. And as you can see here in the dark blue, that's a pre-deal. We handle the target valuation, capital structure, synergy valuation, premium analysis. All of that is a part of the pre-deal. And if we take a moment and we really think about it, there's really 5 players that are involved in M&A. You have obviously your 2, you have your buyer and your seller, right? Those are the 2 that you have to have. The other is the third one would probably be your investment banker. The investment banker's job is really to help set the negotiation between the buyers and as well as the sellers. And then of course you have your corporate attorney. Those are the individuals that will put together the contracts. Because I'm a little biased, I'm going to say still the most important part of that entire transaction comes down to the valuator themselves, because of the mere fact that you're working either as for the acquirer in this situation, because of the mere fact that they want to make sure that this is a valuable asset that they plan on acquiring, and how it actually fits into what they vision for their overall company. From a seller standpoint, obviously you want the seller, we all know this, the sellers tend to think that their business is worth X. That's worth X to them, but it's not necessarily worth the same to the acquirer. So our job is really to share with them what that fair value of that particular business is and what it's worth. So therefore they don't overprice themselves, or more importantly, don't undersell themselves either during that transaction. So therefore, when the negotiation starts with the investment bankers, your job is there to make sure that you facilitate and move it forward, which is the reason why the very first bullet point in this slide is target valuation. And then you move on to the end of the deal, we step away from this. But the real work really comes in post-deal, which is what I started this conversation off in discussing how things have evolved and changed with fair value accounting. Because once that transaction takes place, that post transaction, I should say, now you're looking at the acquirer. The acquirer then adds all this information onto their balance sheets, as well as the intangibles, the identifiable intangibles, along with the goodwills. All of those things from their acquiring company now is ultimately on their balance sheet, and it could impact their business not only just after the transaction, but down the road as well. So you as a evaluator have a very integral role in this overall process now. So I think when we look at M&A, and again, I get very excited about this because it's one of the areas that I truly like to look at. It's good for us to put things in the proper context as it pertains to M&A. And I think that would be helpful when we go through this course down in Florida, is to see how M&A itself, the activity of M&A, how we impact it, and then how it is really impacted on the back end on the post deals. So when we look at M&A, we automatically just see the billion-dollar transactions that are taking place. And the reality of it is that it's not only in the private sectors, but it's also in the public markets as well. Because M&A is all about shaping firms' boundaries, as well as resulting in tremendous reallocation of resources. And I shared private sectors and public markets. It could be the billion-dollar companies. And as you can see, from 2000 to 2020, firms spent over $57 trillion or more on 800,000 acquisitions over that time period. Now, that's not just the billion-dollar transactions. And I know that for our association, a lot of us, specifically Onyx Partners Group, we focus a lot of our attention on the middle market space. And I'll share this little tidbit, and I'll share this also, and I'll have some slides to kind of support this, is that the M&A space for middle market is so robust. If you took out all the companies that are middle market and just had them as their own country, they would literally be either the 5th or the 4th largest GDP in the world behind Japan. That's volume. That speaks a lot about the opportunities that exist there. And I share all of this because as we go through this session and this discussion that we'll talk about financial reporting, it's not about just the billion-dollar companies. It's about all those companies that fall in this spectrum of M&A, from billion to middle market to lower market, We all still have to do those things because as an acquirer, what are you doing? You're acquiring another company and they're adding on to your overall balance sheet, the intangibles as well as the goodwills, as I mentioned. So those are significant parts of the overall business. And to put things into context, because M&A has been going on for quite some time, and I've had these conversations with some in regards to the M&A activity is kind of deflated now. It's not there. It's not really deflated. It's just changed. And in this class, we're going to go over why it's just changed, because it's just a little different. And in fact, this is a slide that kind of tells a really interesting story as it pertains to M&A financial reporting, and why financial reporting, why the guidance is out there, why it's important for you as a evaluator. This slide goes back to 1990, and I love this because my very first job out of school was in 1991 in investment banking. And during that time period, obviously, we were valuing a lot of different types of companies out there, which we'll touch on. So this goes from 1990 all the way up to 2020. And the red line represents volume and activity in the M&A space. But what I want you to take away from this, not only just the red line, because you can see how it's volatile, it's all over the place. I want you to really take a closer look at the gold bars. The gold bars represent recession. It's kind of like an event-driven situation here. When there's an event, what happens? What triggers? What is the outcome of this? And if you look at this chart very closely, what you'll see is that in every single gold bar, M&A activity drops. It hits a trough. But what's interesting is, as you come out of those recessions, look what happens to that red line. It shoots up like a rocket. So it's no wonder why there's more conversation and guidance around fair value accounting, because of the activity there. Now, remember from that first chart, I said the very first part of it, the pre-deal, we're part of that overall sizzle, but it's the post-transaction is where the real work comes in. And those spikes are part of that real work, which we'll go into and we'll talk about that in more detail. But the significance of this chart is just taking a look at the volatility activity, but how M&A market responds dramatically. Now, again, I'm a big M&A person here, and some will say that the government did certain things to help stimulate the economy and to get us out of the recession. I'm in the camp of thinking M&A may have had a little bit to do with that as well, if not even a little, a lot to do with getting out of these particular recessions, because of the things, how they actually conducted their business. So if you look at 92 to 2000, and I mentioned to you, one of my first job was in 91, we did investment banking on certain companies. Take a look at what was going on and what boomed the market. In January of 92, the S&P was at 417.26. Fast forward to the end of 2000, it went from 417 up to 1320. And during that time period, you had the internet boom, that followed by the 90-91 recession. And what were the transactions that were happening? The technologies, the media, the entertainment, telecommunication, anything that had a .com behind it. Those are the types of transactions that we were involved in. Those are the types of transactions that we go back and we take a look at some of those deals at that point in time to where we are right now. Some of those deals probably would have never happened. But that took place 92 up to 2000. Fast forward up to 2000 to 2007. Now it's a different type of activity. Now it's the private equities. Private equities are now taking a bigger stake in this. You're looking at the deal volume, you're looking at the deal value. In 92 to 2000, the deal volume was 8.4, and in 2002 to 2007, it went up to 18. The value, 92 to 2000, 7.4. It jumped to 25.7 in 2002 up to 2007. So financial deals were on the rise during that time period. And these are your big deals. These are the larger bank making transactions. You had JP Morgan's buying Bank One, the Bank of America buying Fleet Boston, and then the private equity deals, all 100% private equity deals. You had HCA, Horizon Entertainment, Univision. These were all acquired by private equity firms. So this was the second recession period where we jumped out, and these were the types of activities that were going on. And then we get to 2010 to 2019, a different breed, because this now we're focusing on cash. Cash now at this point in time becomes a bigger player in all these deals. The number of transactions that were taking place and the amount that was utilized for cash, if you go back to 92 to 2000, it was 28%. 2002 to 2007, it jumped to 32%. Then look at this number, 2010 to 2018, 59% of the transactions were cash. That old phrase, cash is king, is truly relevant here. And if we look at some of the transactions that took place, even though this was probably the longest recovery period that we went through, we still had a lot of activity. IBM buying Red Hat, Microsoft buying LinkedIn, Amazon buying Whole Foods. So each period that we went through, there was a different event cause to trigger us out of that particular recession, or bouncing out of that recession period. And if we look at the entire chart again, from 90 up to 2018, again, the gray bars represent our recession period. And as I mentioned, the 2007 to 2009, that was the longest period of our recession. The other two were a little shorter. But there is one thing that you can see from this chart, is that sometimes it did took a period of time for us to bounce out of the recessions from the downturns. But when we got the ball moving, you can see a lot of the activity was taking place. So your job as evaluator becomes extremely important as far as what we do and how we do. The evaluations on the front end as well as on the back end, even more so important, because you're looking at the different types of things, the mixture of the deals that are being taken place, how the capital is involved, public financing is involved. You're looking at the private equity funding. All of those are now under review as you make that post transaction. And then of course you have your evaluations. Now, there's tons of studies that are out there, and during this session we're going to break down a lot about how valuations are impacted during recessions, during booming time periods of the market. But over the last 3 decades, we've seen transaction multiples have historically fallen with the economy, right? Resulting in, as it falls, resulting in lower valuations. And so therefore the pool of acquisition targets grow basically as typically during a recession period. So if we look back at those charts during the recession, when we hit the trough period, more and more activity was out there, because now we're building up what's called your M&A supply. But the key takeaway from this is understanding that when the economy is falling, that typically our valuations start to fall. But because of that, it gives buyers out there ability to buy, which part is consisting of the demand for M&A. So our valuations typically will be stabilized during any particular dip that's out there, and economic downturns tend to impact marginal players. And if they're smart players out there, here's what they will be doing. One, they'll realign their businesses. That's essentially, for those of you that are consultants, those are the things that you actually want them to try to do. The other is you want to shore up their balance sheets, as well as other key areas of their overall business. And lastly is to become more of a prospective buyer to potential sellers. So if we go back to my favorite chart here, again, the structure and the pricing, that is the sizzle, that's the excitement, that's what goes on as far as developing the valuation and assisting in that overall process. And of course, for evaluators that are out there now, you know that's a different type of standard that we work with when we're valuing those companies. It's the post deal. The post deal is a lot different. And I highlighted this because now we're integrating those two companies together and creating value. And a part of that is transfer pricing, purchase price allocation, impairment testing, revaluation, IPO spinoff potentially. So the real work is in this part of the deal. The pre-deal is the exciting part. We step away in the end deal, But as soon as the deal is closed, that's when the real work begins. And that's really where a lot of our focus is going to be during this session. But I think it is extremely important for us to be aware of the context of where M&A is and how M&A has impacted financial reporting over this time period. And as we all know that we have certain guidances that are out there, because everything that we do, essentially, especially over the last several years, we want to make sure that all of our financial reporting is in line with GAAP. And with it being aligned with GAAP, there's 3 areas that we'll discuss today as not necessarily today, but for our class that we'll discuss as far as our accounting standards codification. We'll look at 820, 805, and 350. 820 is fair value measurements. 350, we're dealing with intangibles and goodwill. But we'll spend majority of our session really breaking down 805, which is business combination. And just for those that are not completely familiar with these codifications, I'll give you a little overview of each one of them. So with 820, we have the fair value measurements, which was issued in 2006, in September 2006. And basically it's an established framework of how to apply fair value concepts, provided required disclosures, as well as on your financial statements. And what's unique about this, and I always enjoy reading literature on all of our rules and guidances, is because of the mere fact that M&A has been taking place many, many years ago. And from the chart that I shared with you, we started back in 1990. Well, this particular guidance did not come into play until 2006. So you can see the activity that has gone on, and we want to make sure our financial reporting is aligned with our GAAP. Having some form of guidance was extremely important. So we will spend some time going over 820. And here are some of the key components of 820 of establishing understanding of the entry price. And I think that's important because there's a lot of misconception as far as what exactly is the entry price. Is it the buy side or is it the sell side? So we'll spend a lot of time going through that. Majority of our time when we talk about 820, going over that side, but also determining the unit account, the market participants, what level they are in, what their activity is in this, the hierarchy of this, the non-financial assets, identifying those particular assets, and of course the standard valuation approaches and techniques. And again, when we look at the pre-deal and the post-deal, I know that as valuators, we know what our standard values are, fair market value, but that's more from a tax position. From a financial reporting, we look at it from a fair value. So it's a different type of concept, and we'll walk through and break that down as well and give quite a few examples on understanding the differences between the two. And I think that's going to be extremely valuable for evaluators. Also, for those that are actually still doing valuation on the pre-deal, that are interested in being on the post side of it, it's great to have this handout to put up in your office and to utilize as a chart to walk through. But for those that are already that have been doing the post deal, it's always great to just do a little refresher, take a look at it from different angles as well. And also from classes that I like to teach, I like to keep them very open and have open dialogue and going back and forth, because the goal is for others to learn from us in a group, as well as not just hearing from the projects and the deals that we work on. You may have some other interesting deals where it really affects from a fair value measurement or 820. So we will dive into those types of areas. 350 deals with intangibles and goodwill. And this was issued back in 2001, subsequently amended ASU 2017-4. Now, 350 relates to the impairment of goodwill and other indefinite lived intangible assets. The one thing that I will spend some time on this, because we could spend probably the whole session just on the impairment of goodwill impairments. But this is a chart that I actually love to go over and utilize, because I think it explains things really well when you're looking at goodwill impairment. And it's a two-step process. So under ASE 350, you have goodwill impairment test. And essentially, the first step is And pretty much anything that we go over, it'll be in a situation where we can decide as far as is it a yes or a no before you move forward. So the unique thing here is that step one, we have fair value of the reporting unit. Is it greater than the book value of reporting unit? If the answer is yes, okay, you're already aware that there is no goodwill impairment. But oftentimes the answer is going to be no. And when it's no, then you move over to step two, and your fair value of all your assets is the implied goodwill. Now you're in the phase of implied goodwill. Is that greater than your book value of goodwill? If the answer is yes, now you still have an option of it not being goodwill, no goodwill impairment. But the reality of it is more times than not, at least in our experience, in which we'll walk through that overall process of identifying what that fair value of goodwill, the good value, book value of goodwill through this impairment testing. So we'll have an opportunity to walk through seeing real situations of clients that we've worked with and going through those particular impairments as well to see how it's an actual practice for you to take back over with you to your office. And then the last section, which is the, well, not last section, but the Accounting Standards Codification 805. And this is dealing with business combinations. It's the overall principle that when an entity, which is your acquirer, takes control of another entity, which is essentially your target, and the fair value of underlying exchange, the transaction is used to establish a new accounting basis of their acquired entity. So if we go back to the very beginning of today, and I mentioned to you that since there's a lot of activity that goes on in M&A, there's a lot of changes to the guidance that you see with financial reporting. This particular group, the acquirer that's acquiring that overall company, you're not just acquiring a company, you are acquiring everything about that company, and it is being added onto your overall balance sheet. And your goal as a valuator and how you evaluate that company will have an impact on the reported earnings. So you want to make sure that transaction is very successful, and you want to make sure as a valuator from your accounting of their books is accurate, and it is in line with what you intended when this company was being merged with one another. We'll walk through a great screening process as it comes down to 805, because the screening process will allow evaluator to understand, is this truly a business combination, or is it just an asset acquisition? And what we're referring to, is it a group of assets or of similar assets together, or are we really looking at this as a single asset? So this screening process essentially, and I know it's pretty hard to see this, and it'll be a handout that we will go through, because we'll match this up against an actual transaction, and we'll walk through during this session, is this really a business combination, or is this an asset acquisition? But as you can see, as we walk through this, is it substantially all of the fair value concentrated in a single asset, or is it a group of similar assets? And again, it goes back to that yes or no. As we walk through the particular grid here, you'll see is yes, is a set of assets or a group of assets. But if it's no, you continue to move forward and you continue to apply this particular framework. The next question is, do they have outputs? And you can have a yes or no with the outputs, because if it's a yes, the outputs, it does have outputs, then you ask, does the set have an input or subtractive process? If it's no, does the set have an organized workforce and an input that workforce could develop and convert into outputs? And this is the last level or the step that we would walk through as it pertains to business combination, of making sure that we apply to that particular definition. If it's a yes on the set, is input a substantial process? If it's a yes, then the set is a business. It is set up as a business combination, and therefore we pass that particular. But if it's not, it's set up as similar assets. And the same thing applies to whether or not it can be developed into converted groups. If it's a yes, it's set as a business. If it's a no, then we know that it's an asset or a group of assets, which gives you the complete distinction between, is it a business combination, or is this transaction an asset acquisition? So again, we'll walk through those particular things. We'll probably spend more time in this particular area, mainly because of the mere fact that as it comes down to mergers and acquisition, combining these businesses together, yes, the fair value measurement is extremely important. We'll walk through the testing of the intangibles and goodwills as well. But understanding first and foremost, is this a business combination or is this an asset acquisition? So these, even though the other two tie into 805, this is a center, we consider this to be the centerpiece when we're working with financial reporting. Now, I know this is a topic that a number of us have talked about, have seen. And if we go back to my chart, those 3 bullet points as it pertains to 805, purchase price allocation is going to be one of those areas that we will have plenty of time to walk through and talk about. And again, complying with GAAP and financial reporting purposes. One thing that I want you to take away from today and understanding going into this particular session is that an acquirer needs to report the specific types that are associated with the fair values of that acquired tangible assets. And they could be monetary, they could be non-monetary, as well as the intangible assets. And you as evaluator are focused on the fair values that include the opening post-acquisition balance sheet. You want to make sure that they're periodically adjusted to reflect the depreciation, amortization, and the intangible assets. And we'll walk through these 3 components, which are consistent of the PPA, the purchase price allocation. We'll walk through fair value adjustments, identification, recognition, and valuation of the new assets. We'll have goodwill, cash generating units. These are the 3 components recognized as far as components of your purchase price allocation. And we'll walk through those, each one of these particular steps, and sharing different examples along the way. And then the last part that we will touch on, which is pretty much one of those particular areas that I will say that is a unique space. It's not necessary to have, but we highly recommend it. And I think it's important for us to walk through this during this session so that everyone walks away with a better understanding when it pertains to fairness opinions. And I know that we probably all heard them before, but a fairness opinion is a letter that summarizes this transaction. And this letter is done primarily by an independent third party, typically by an evaluator. And our job is to indicate whether the certain financial elements in this particular transaction that we were a part of, such as the price, are fair to the specific constitute or from a financial point of view. So when you look at fairness opinions, we already know that they're commonly used with M&A, but they're used for other activities as well. Like I stated, we deal with ESOPs, so we deal with fairness opinions there. But because of the types of activity that goes on in M&A, it's really important for those to have a fairness opinion put together. And from a valuation standpoint, this is a great role for you to participate and be a part of, because they'll take this letter and it is used by the boards, is used by different committees, or the company's fiduciary, such as in the ESOPs, you deal with fiduciaries and assessing the fairness of the financial terms of that particular transaction. The one thing that I do want you to take away from this today, as well as during this class, and I'll reemphasize this, is that yes, the fairness opinion is a letter that is put together by you to understand the fairness of this particular transaction. Understand, it is not a legal document. It's not regulatory, it's not like accounting, insurance, tax, or any of those types of things, or somewhere any particular advice. It is there as a guide for for this particular transaction, for those individuals that are a part of reviewing this particular transaction. And it is not designed for them to make a decision as far as whether or not they should vote for this particular transaction or not. So it's just important for them to just kind of see how that transaction, how these 2 companies, or a company and these other 2 that they've acquired, could be more than one that they're acquiring, which we'll talk about a little bit more in 805 business combinations. But it does help provide the board with additional information to build a record satisfaction as far as their fiduciary duty and the care of reviewing the transaction under a good business judgment. And what I will say lastly is for a little homework for those of you that are really interested in fairness opinions right before the class. I would say take time to read over a Delaware Supreme Court ruling, Smith versus Van Gorkman. And for those of you old enough to recall this, this is a case where the court ruled against the board of directors of TransUnion Corporation, who had voted for an LBO, a leverage buyout, based in part on the absence of a fairness opinion from a evaluator. So the court believed the liability could have been avoided had the directors elicit a fairness opinion from anyone in position to know the firm's value. So again, I overly emphasize this. Fairness opinions is a great item to have and be a part of the overall transaction. We recommend it wholeheartedly when we're involved in an M&A transaction. It's not a legal document. It's not necessarily requested by some, but we're going to walk through this particular area because I think it's important as evaluators that parties understand exactly what this transaction is and how this transaction is put together. It's not designed for them to check off the box and vote, say yay or nay on this transaction, but to just become more aware of the fairness of this particular transaction. This court case is a fantastic court case. If you don't get a chance to read over, I'll have copies of that, and I'll make sure I present that during the session as well. So again, I'm Stephen White. I'm excited about having the opportunity to be a part of this conference. This is a unique space, M&A. We do a lot of different activities as valuators, but I do believe M&A is one of those areas that is it's exciting. There's something different happening all the time. We have to be up to date as far as regulations, be very familiar with the different guidances that are out there, depending on which side that you're on. And if I can go back to my favorite slide here, forgive me for flipping so fast, looking at this slide here, if you are on this side of the structuring and pricing deal, again, it's a different type of valuation that you're actually putting together. And because we don't have a lot of time today to really dive into this, we're going to go through and understand. So everyone will walk away from this class understanding the standard value is different on this side of the trade versus the post-deal side of the trade. We have fair market value on this side. We have fair value on this side. And we're going to walk through explaining why is there a difference between the two. And that's a unique side to kick that under consideration. We'll also break down a lot of different examples. And I think examples paint the picture more so than just reading from a textbook as far as understanding how the M&A valuation works for the pre-deal as well as the post-deal. So I'm excited about having that opportunity to present this to you. I'm a big chart person, so I like going over charts. And I hope you all get the exact same type of enthusiasm about valuation on M&A from a financial reporting standpoint and learn a great deal about the transfer pricing, the purchase pricing, as well as the impairment testing at the end, including the fairness opinions. And I think, China, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Stephen. Let's see if there's any questions. Does
Sure.
anybody on the guest have any questions for Stephen? If you do, please go ahead and submit those through the Q&A panel. And then, yeah. And again, you can see Stephen's full presentation if you join us. I included a link, but he'll be presenting during our conference in December in Fort Lauderdale. And again, if you want to join, there is a slide to register or to get more information about the conference there.
Yeah, in this particular session, and I know everyone goes over their sessions differently. And one of the areas that I like to do is really having an open type session. We'll go through each one of these sections, the codifications, we'll go through each one of those, but I think it's more practical when we go through examples of different things that we actually encounter in our transactions of the post deal. And I will be the first to admit, I'm a big pre-deal person. I like that side of it, but the real work really comes in the post-deal. And so that's where we'll spend a lot of our time discussing on the understanding the fair value measurements, business combinations there.
And Stephen, we did have a question come in from Ninesh. The first one is typically, at what deal size do companies seek an external valuation expert?
Great. That's a great question. And that's the reason why I mentioned, I think oftentimes people start thinking of the billion-dollar transactions that are out there. I think and I can only speak for our firm, that our sweet spot is anywhere between 20 up to $55 million. That's kind of like our sweet spot. We handle deals a little larger. We do handle some that are smaller. In each one of those situations, we've always been asked to come in and provide valuation work here. I will put a disclaimer on that, because all of the M&A work that we do, our clients are the attorneys and sometimes the investment bankers. So we've developed a relationship where they automatically bring us in to do this part of the transaction. Hopefully that makes sense.
Let's see, and there's one more question. How do you deal with potential overvaluation of a deal, especially when the M&A market is hot and valuations are high?
Say that first part again.
Oh, so this is it says, how do you deal with potential overvaluation of a deal, especially when the M&A market is hot and valuations are high?
Okay. So you're asking as far as the valuations being too high on certain transactions that are out there. That's a great question. And here's the reason why I'm saying that's a great question, because if you go back to, let's just use the last 3 years, where your point about the M&A market being hot. So in the third quarter of 2020, our phones were ringing off the hook because we were dealing with a lot of activity. Private equities were, that money that they had sitting in their coffers over the last year and a half, they were ready to go out and buy, and they were buying any and everything that they could. We work with some private equity groups right now, and they were just absorbing companies left and right. That ran all the way through 2021. And if you notice that in 2022, that torrid pace slowed down dramatically. The number of deals started slowing down. Size of the deals, if you break that through, you'll see the size of the deals change. To get to your question on how do you handle this, it's also understanding the types of entities that you're actually acquiring. So when we look at valuation, sometimes we're looking, just like we look at the multiples. Multiples are looking at the industry as a whole. That's throwing everything that's in underneath that SIC or that GICS code to get that particular multiple. When we are valuing companies, we're looking at the type of asset that they're actually valuing. And again, we're talking about the pre-deal side here. So those quality assets values are a lot different than those that are not as high quality assets. So there is a distinction there between those, which is the reason why I would never let anyone get caught up on utilizing multiples at face value without really scrubbing the list to make sure that you are truly comparing those companies together with one another. And I wish we had time for me to pull one up for you to see what I mean by that of quality assets versus non-quality assets. The non-quality assets, those are the ones that you hear mostly about from a valuation standpoint. Sometimes they're a little too overpriced, but it's because we didn't take the time to do our own due diligence, which is something that we'll talk a lot about during this conference as well, due diligence, of making certain that our valuations are not overvalued in those particular situations. And yeah, the deal market, I still believe is still high. It's just the types of assets that are being valued at this point or being acquired. That's a good question. I like that. If you're down in Florida, we have to go through that one again. And I have to make note of bringing that up, because I think that's an excellent point. And I'm always arguing that point of why our jobs are going to be around for quite some time instead of the robo evaluators, because of the mere fact that you can't just plug in a couple of things and generate a valuation of a company. Every company is not the same. And that's where your expertise is so important, specifically in the post deal. your expertise is so important during this time period.
Great, thank you, Stephen.
No
Looks
problem.
like we have one more question that came in from Trish.
Sure.
What percentage of the work in this space, excuse me, what percentage of the work in this space that you service are public companies?
That's a quick one. 0. We only deal in private companies. So everything that we will go over at this conference will be geared toward just private companies. That's our area. That's our expertise, is in the private sector.
Great.
But if you know some public companies that you want to invite us to participate with you online, we'll open our doors for that as well.
Great. Looks like that is all of the questions.
Okay.
Thank you for taking a moment to answer all those.
No problem at all. That's what our conference is going to be like. We'll go through slides. You'll all have slides. We'll give you handouts. But the real understanding for me, when I used to sit in the audience, is having that opportunity to engage with the instructor. So therefore, I can take things back to the office. I always take something back from every conference that I go to, because we all do something a little different. We understand the mechanics of evaluating. We all know that. It's just now, how do we apply it at different times and for what different purposes that are out there? Kind of like the multiples and evaluations. Are they high, or low? What makes them different? Well, we may have differences of opinion on how we got there. That's where we open up that dialogue.
Great, thanks. And again, the link to the conference is in the material, or you can go to www.nacb.com/conferences. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank
Any
you.
last words, comments before?
I'm just excited for this. And again, it's M&A. So I'm excited about it regardless of whatever's going on in the marketplace. As I share with you on the slide, M&A activity is always going to be around. There could be different reasons that would drive it. And it's our job to stay abreast of those types of activities and applying the guidance that we actually have. That's where we're going to have the fun in this session. It's really taking the activity that we have and our guidance and applying it to make sure that we give a great product at the end of the post deal.
Thanks, Stephen. We look forward to your presentation in December.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing. You got it? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and regarding ABW International, our next one will be on November 20th. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we hope you have a great week. Thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.